Some artists don't fit the mold. Shelley Duvall never did, and the world eventually caught up to what she was doing. Whitney Houston redefined what a voice could carry. Not just a note, a whole life pressed into sound. Quincy Jones spent decades proving that the most dangerous thing in music isn't a loud record. It's a precise one. Prince. Shannon Doherty spent her career being underestimated, written off, and then watched as everyone had to revise their opinion. Bob Saget understood something most people missed, that the gap between wholesome and dark isn't a wall, it's a door. Picture Detroit, 1999. Not the comeback city of later decades, the raw, industrial Detroit of cracked sidewalks and closing plants. In a recording studio that smelled of cigarette smoke and fast food, a 26-year-old white rapper with bleached hair and a voice like a knife edge was about to play Dr. Dre, a track that would rewrite the rules of American music. Marshall Mathers had driven across the country on almost nothing. He had a daughter at home, he had a mother he was at war with, and a city that had never quite claimed him. And he had a tape. That tape became the Slim Shady LP. What made that moment extraordinary wasn't just the talent, it was the collision of everything wrong and right happening at once. Marshall Bruce Mathers III was born in St. Joseph, Missouri, in 1972. But Missouri was never really home. His mother Debbie moved constantly, and Marshall spent his childhood orbiting the east side of Detroit without ever quite landing. He changed schools so often that he stopped trying to make friends. He was bullied badly enough that one incident left him hospitalized with a serious head injury at age 9. He failed 9th grade 3 times. By 15, he had dropped out. What he had instead of school was language. He discovered hip-hop through the Furious Five and LL Cool J, and he became obsessed, not just with the music, but with the mechanics of it, how words fit together, how syllables could land like punches or dissolve like smoke. He started freestyling in lunchrooms and at basement ciphers, and he was good enough that people noticed, even when they also dismissed him for being white. The Detroit rap scene in the late 80s and early 90s did not have a welcome mat out for Marshall Mathers. He had to earn every inch of ground, and he did it by being impossible to out-rhyme. His early recordings under the Eminem name, the albums Infinite in 1996 and Slim Shady EP in 1997, were largely ignored outside local circles. Infinite, in particular, got written off as derivative. That rejection cut deep, and what came back out of that wound was something darker and more combustible. The Slim Shady character wasn't just a persona to put distance between Marshall and the camera. It was a pressure valve, a way to say every violent, absurd, self-lacerating thing that had built up across 2 decades of instability. Slim Shady could say what Marshall couldn't afford to. When the Slim Shady EP caught Dre's attention through producer Jimmy Iovine, it triggered one of the most consequential signings in hip-hop history. Dre didn't just hand Eminem a deal, he collaborated, shaped, and amplified. The Slim Shady LP arrived in February 1999 and hit American culture like a controlled detonation. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, went multi-platinum within weeks, and generated the kind of controversy that no publicist can manufacture. My Name Is was playful and chaotic and funny in the way that made parents nervous. Radio stations played it constantly, while editorialists warned about what it meant. What it meant was that something had shifted. Eminem was doing something technically rare, internal rhyme schemes of a complexity that few pop artists had attempted, punchlines that arrived 3 bars early and paid off 4 bars later, a tonal range that moved from cartoonish to genuinely menacing within a single verse. Critics who came to mock stayed to transcribe lyrics. The Marshall Mathers LP followed in 2000 and took everything further. It sold 1.76 million copies in its first week, a record at the time for a solo artist. It was also far more personal and far more volatile. Kim, a track built around his tortured relationship with childhood sweetheart and on-and-off partner Kim Scott, was not satire. It was raw, uncomfortable, and clinically precise in its portrayal of domestic rage. Stan introduced a new word into the English language. The Way I Am was a thesis statement about the cost of being that visible, that scrutinized, that demanded of. The album was nominated for Album of the Year at the Grammys, a genre barrier that had rarely been crossed by a rap record at that level. He won. Then he won again. Then he kept winning. The Eminem Show in 2002 solidified something. This was not a flash. The album debuted at #1 in multiple countries, went diamond in the United States, and produced Without Me, a track so confident in its own absurdity that it functioned almost as a manifesto. But it also contained White America, which did something rare for a pop crossover success. It stared directly at its own cultural mechanics. Eminem was white, and he knew exactly what that meant in terms of who let him in the door and who bought his records. He said so plainly, in a verse that most artists at his commercial level would never have written. During these years, his personal life was in constant motion. He married Kim in 1999, divorced her in 2001, and the two cycled in and out of each other's lives in ways that generated headlines and lawsuits. He was raising his daughter, Haley Jade, and later took in his niece, Elena, and his half-sister, Stevie. The contrast between the domestic reality and the public persona was always present. He was a father doing school runs in the same city where he'd grown up, poor and untethered. Encore in 2004 was the first sign of strain. Uneven, overcrowded, still selling millions, but lacking the cohesion of its predecessors. And then something more serious arrived. The years between 2005 and 2008 nearly ended everything. Prescription drug addiction, primarily to sleep aids and opioids, pulled Marshall Mathers into a spiral that was, by his own later accounting, a genuine near-death experience. He performed erratically. He went quiet. He gained weight and became nearly unrecognizable. In 2007, a near-fatal overdose involving methadone was the breaking point. Recovery was not fast or linear. He worked through it, relapsed, and worked through it again. What eventually brought him back, in part, was the death of his close friend and collaborator, Proof, shot and killed outside a Detroit club in 2006, which functioned as a kind of terrible anchor point. The grief was real, and it refocused something. Relapse arrived in 2009. It was a commercial success and a critical mixed bag, technically impressive in stretches, but tonally unsettled, still finding its footing. Recovery in 2010 was different. It was the album of a man who had been through the thing and was still standing. Sober, deliberate, and at times starkly emotional, it became his best-selling album globally. Not Afraid became an anthem in a way that transcended genre. It was the kind of song that people played in hospital rooms and at graduations, and not because it was soft, because it was honest. The 2000s brought a sustained second chapter that few artists manage at that level of original fame. The Marshall Mathers LP2 in 2013 was a direct dialogue with his own catalogue, an artist in conversation with the younger version of himself, revisiting the sounds and the anger, but with more control and more self-awareness. It debuted at number 1. Rap God, a 6-minute technical exhibition that included a passage where he delivered roughly 100 words in 15 seconds, became a cultural reference point for what rap could do mechanically. He collaborated, feuded, and stayed restless. His public conflicts with Machine Gun Kelly in 2018, most visibly, showed that he still had the appetite for battle rap confrontation that had defined his early career. Killshot, his response to MGK's diss track, broke streaming records on YouTube within hours of its release. Whether one found the beef compelling or tiresome, its scale demonstrated something about the ongoing weight of his name. The album, Kamikaze, arrived unannounced in 2018, a directional shift that surprised critics who had begun to write familiar narratives about declining relevance. Music to be Murdered By, in 2020, was its own provocation, dense, demanding, not designed to ease anyone in gently. The title and album art referenced Alfred Hitchcock. It debuted at number 1. He does not appear to be a man interested in a graceful wind down. The Eminem story is, at its center, a story about survival through specificity. He did not generalize his pain into palatability. He made it granular, uncomfortable, sometimes indefensible. And somehow, that rawness was the thing that connected. The specificity of growing up on the east side of Detroit, of a particular kind of chaotic childhood, of a particular failure and a particular addiction and a particular grief. All of it rendered in verse forms of unusual technical discipline. He is the best-selling rap artist of all time in the United States. He has won 15 Grammy Awards. His albums have sold over 220 million copies worldwide. He is one of the relatively small number of artists to have been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he remains, decades into a career that has outlasted most predictions and all of the early dismissals, a figure of genuine cultural weight. Not because of what he once was, but because of the ongoing, restless, unresolved thing he continues to be. Detroit claimed him eventually. Or maybe he claimed Detroit. Either way, the city is in every syllable.